Hello, and welcome to Life in Focus with me, your host, Stephen Akinsanya. My apologies to those who have been waiting. We had a few technical issues, but we're here now and ready to run this show. And you'll recall that last week, when we relaunched Life in Focus after a sabbatical, I had a period of reflection as to where we are with this issue of knife crime and my views and my thoughts about how we really combat this national disgrace, if you like, going forward. And so, as we progress with this season's shows, I'm going to be having a number of guests looking at this issue and things that are being done in the field and things that we need to do, and having some really tough conversations, because I think it's going to be necessary to have these tough conversations if we're really going to deal with the issue of knife crime, youth violence, which seems to be spiraling out of control. My guest on this week's show, Dr. David Watchman Williams, is a pioneering gospel reggae artist. He's a youth justice specialist and founder of the Rap Academy, and tells quite an amazing personal story from international incarceration to international ministry. His music and message have transformed thousands of lives across the UK. At the age of 19, David had his first experience of confrontation with the police, which left him angry towards authority and the police in general. He is someone who regularly tells the story of being diagnosed with auditory dyslexia, something which he did not see as a disability, but rather a different ability. And he also tells an amazing story of his time spent in prison and what he learned in that time. David now is currently the engagement lead youth specialist for the Met Police. David holds a doctorate degree in the arts, community justice and ministry. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. David Williams on the show. I've known David for, oh my gosh, many, many years now. But it's always a pleasure to see him looking so youthful and vibrant. And so, David, welcome back to the show.
Welcome. Thank you for having us. I'm really feel privileged to be here again on this wonderful show and for such an amazing sort of topic as we're going to discuss.
Right, David, before we get into that, I always like to find out more about my guest's personal journey. And I've touched on, your confrontation at the age of 19 with the police. You grew up in Brixton, born in 1969 to Jamaican parents. Tell me a little bit about your background and your journey, David.
I had two amazing parents. They did so much for me, and just growing up, I guess, in the time that I grew up, it was a time when there were challenges to get from A to B, to get from home to school to home was an obstacle course. I was running from mods, teddy boys, and skinheads who wanted my head, all because of the color of my skin. So I had to learn to defend myself. I took up boxing and soon became a professional street fighter, and I took it to the streets. It was a tough time growing up, despite that I had such a wonderful family. And even with the topic today, as you mentioned, the running that I had with the law was around a knife issue. And it's so amazing that, it's so profound that this is something that I'm now pioneering and pushing for, to get these knives off the street and trying to stamp down on this knife crime.
Yeah. Now, I mean, David, we've spoken over the years about this, and I've never wanted to be the prophet of doom. I always want to be someone who looks forward and is positive. But I'm really concerned about where we're heading and the actual lack of progress that we seem to have been making around this issue of knife crime and youth violence. And I wanted to get your perspective on why we're still here and what do you see as the real issues behind this? Why are we spiraling out of control?
I mean, some would say systematic failures, and they would be right. There is an holistic approach we have to take to tackle this issue. I want you to know you are talking to a very frustrated man right now, concerning knife crime, and I should probably be rebuked because I am not putting anything on my social media around about knife crime, my LinkedIn. I am just so fed up of the whole issue currently. What I'm seeing, there are so much great organizations out there doing such great work, and sometimes it's just not filtering through from the government to the grassroots organizations who have done some great work with young people and have some great answers in there to tackle knife crime, and it's not being taken up. You know, we've seen some great pioneers out there supporting and coming against the knife crime. Celebrities have taken up the cause against the zombie knives, but yet again, I have to ask myself: do we want to break the blade? Do we want to break and stop the cycle? I don't really know. And I'm usually quite good at having some answers, but what I'm looking at and what I'm seeing, it doesn't marry up. It's like a paradox. It's two conflicting truths. Let's stop knife crime on one hand, but nothing seems to be being done.
I mean, we read in the news. I read just recently last week of a young boy, 14 years of age, in Manchester, and his final words to those who were trying to help him: "I don't want to die." It was heartbreaking. 14 years of age.
Yes, I read the article.
Now, I mean, where do we begin? I mean, we talk about the government, and we can come back to that, and where the real hunger or desire is to stop this. But do we have to take a step back and look at what has happened to society? Or you know, you talk about an incident when you were 19 involving a knife. Now, I think in that scenario, actually, you didn't have a weapon. Is that right?
That's correct. Precisely so. I mean, I did not have a knife on me. The knife was put on me, and it was said, "We know you did not have the knife. You know you did not have the knife, but you Brixton boys think you're hard." I believe that cycle needs to be broken, because it was the knife, it was the blade that was used to frame and stitch me up. It was that same very knife. And if I look at it to how I'm looking at it today, it's the knife that's being still used today. You know, I believe there is something inherited, something generational we've inherited, and we've got to break that cycle. And this is something that came to me just before I came on air, and I'm realizing we're talking about stopping knife crime in the community. And as you are aware, I also work within the prison estate.
Yeah.
And regularly on the landing, people are being stabbed. Just this week, someone was stabbed. I believe it was about 6 to 8 times in their back. People have been had their throats slashed in the prison. So what is that telling us? If we cannot resolve the issues taking place in the prison, how are we going to stop it in the community?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't. It just doesn't,
like a prison. Yeah.
It doesn't add up. That's a prison. But still, there's many knives, and many people are getting wounded in prisons by knives. So there's something that's got to be broken. But I think I love what you said, Steve. We're going to have to take a step back. I think community groups and leaders such as yourself come together and really just thrash this out and try and find out what is going on and what's causing this, you know, rise in knife crime and people using it as a weapon. I mean, I can come up with different ideas and different reasons to why all day long, you know, being fearful, you know, feeling unsafe, not feeling part of a community, a lack of fathers in the home. You know, there's so many things I can say, but I don't see anything really reducing and stopping and breaking this cycle.
Wow, well, that's very depressing to hear that. And this is what I'm concerned about, because, you know, year in, year out, we have we have the stats. I don't even bother with the stats anymore. I'm just focused on how do we stop this? And one of the things that's really been running through my mind is we're supposed to be a modern democracy. And I got to thinking, is knife crime an issue in other parts of the world? So, for example, what we call the third world. You know, is knife crime happening in parts of Africa and Asia amongst its young people? I don't know the answer. I suspect not, because I've got friends in that part of the world, and they certainly look to the UK with shock and horror. I'm connected to a lot of people through the LinkedIn platform internationally, and they say, "What on earth is happening in the UK?" So I'm really curious to seek out what is it that is happening amongst our young people. And you've touched on some of the things. You've talked about the lack of father figures. All right, let's take that as an example. David, we're both men of the world. Why would you say, talking to someone who says knife crime is a problem, we have to fix it, the lack of father figures, why is that an issue for a young person?
It's not. Everybody needs a positive role model, a positive influence. Everybody and everything reproduces after its own kind. So now, if you don't have your own kind present, you begin to make up what you see as being right, just like how we will see with not drifting away misogynistic behavior, what we think is the right approach. And I think having these father figures, having these men of influence in the lives of young people is very vital, because young people, many of them today, do not know how to resolve a conflict. They do not know how to de-escalate. Many of them do not know how to communicate and articulate themselves. And if there's anything worse than the rage and the frustration that comes out of us, it's the things that don't come out of us. And it's the inability to put your thoughts into words that can be very frustrating. And I think that's part of it. And so young people are just lashing out, and they're using the knife. And there's a cause and effect, unfortunately. So we do need to somehow get men to stand up within the community. You see, we have many men who are not role models, they're road models. And we need to allow young people to distinguish between the two. They're not friends, they're foes. But it's giving them to understand that themselves.
And I mean, predominantly when we talk about knife crime, we are talking about young boys, young men. I think we're safe to say that. I mean, I'm sure there are young women who carry knives, but predominantly it is young men. I often get into an argument with people about who's responsible for knife crime, and it's so easy and myopic to say it's a black problem, which it clearly isn't. If you're looking through the lens of South London, then you might say, well, predominantly more young black men are being stabbed in South London or London than elsewhere. But if you go across the country, and we've seen the media of knife offences, it's affecting young people from every demographic across the country. And so that tells me that there is something going on across the country that is impacting young people and their thought processes in terms of carrying weapons and being prepared to use them. Now, you've talked about male role models. This is male roles for young boys, particularly at a crucial stage in their life. And it might not even be their biological father. It might be an uncle or just another male role model you can look up to. But what about youth culture? I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but there seems to be a culture where it's acceptable and being glorified to record people being in altercations, fights. It appears on YouTube and it gets on Snapchat and TikTok and it gets likes. Have we become desensitized to violence, which is also part of the fuel of knife crime?
I would say yes. I believe knife crime, violence in itself is being glorified. There's so many different mediums. We see it through the music that is being portrayed as well. And these things are glorifying knife crime. Now, I've stopped a long time. There was a time when you would show young people pictures of wounds and someone who's been stabbed and lacerations and so forth. But now if you show them that, they glorify it, they laugh at it, and they find it funny. So we are desensitized. That's not the approach. We're trying to bring in fear to those young people who don't know fear, yet still there is an element of fear. Of course, as you know, the acronym force evidence appearing real. That's why when they go out, they feel they need their knife with them. They feel like a soldier on a battlefield. Their knife is their shield, and they won't go out without it because they feel naked. And I want to know why. So remember, so they're looking at knife and they're saying there's a protection. And that's very powerful because they're saying no one's protecting us. That's what they're saying. That's what they're actually saying. There is no one to protect us, so I'm going to draw for the blade. They're saying, I am protecting myself. No one's looking out for me. That's what they're really saying. Because you would not walk with a knife for protection if you felt protected. And they do not feel protected. And I don't believe it's just not feeling protected within the home, or the community. I believe it's with local government. I really do. They just don't feel protected. They don't feel part of a society. And these are the things that we also need to address.
I mean, that fear actually can be extended to just people of an older age bracket who, even in their own communities, do not feel protected from, if you want, street robbery or people having their watches taken or people having their phones snatched. I think there is a belief now amongst many people that they don't feel protected, and that, I guess, relates to law enforcement. Do we have enough police officers?
No. Now, I had a chat with a young man only this week, and he was saying to me, listen, and even though this was the prison estate, he's saying there's not enough staff.
Even in the prison?
And this was in prison. He said, there's not enough staff, And he said, that's a problem. And he gave an illustration, and he said, we should go out on the landing at a specific time. When we don't come out on the landing to go into the yard, and we're left for longer time periods, we're all raging now. And he said to me, it's like being the bulldog syndrome, he said. As you let us out now, we're hangry. This is what he said to me. We're hangry. And so we start attacking each other because we're frustrated. And I believe the same is so in the community. Young people, they're frustrated. They're frustrated. There's nowhere to go. We've taken away the majority of the youth clubs, the places that they can go as a safe place for them. And this is part of it as well. And so there's so much, as I said, it's an holistic approach that we need to look at.
I mean, I've said for a long time that a nation's greatest investment has got to be in its people, and particularly its youth, because many of our politicians seem to operate on the basis that the decisions they're making are currently for the here and now and not for the future. You and I both know everything that we do should be with one eye on the fact that we're not going to be here very long. We're preparing the ground for those coming after us. Yeah. And when you talk about youth clubs, places, safe spaces, I know that there are some people who turn their nose up at that and say, oh, that's not the reason, that's not important. But it is important. It is. Safe places for youngsters, places for them to meet after school rather than being on the street. Systematically, all of that has gone in many, many areas. What? I
mean, yeah, we're building more prisons. I do believe, and I understand why, but we should be focusing on building people, and that's what community justice is about. Criminal justice, I view it more as a diagnosis, where community justice is more of the prognosis. Criminal justice tells you what's wrong with you, where community justice tells you what can be right with you. Criminal justice points out the obvious problem, but community justice brings hope and a solution. And I think that's where we also need to be focusing, bringing hope and a solution. You go into so many of the prisons today, you go on the landings, you go in the wing, it's like another estate. It's a subculture, another world. If you didn't know drugs, you know drugs now. If you didn't know how to make the connection, you know how to make the connections now. If you didn't know how to make a weapon, you know how to make a weapon now. And so there's a lot of changes that we need to look into, definitely in the likes of police, law enforcement. We need to go. I personally believe the Bobby on the Beat back in the days was a very relevant, feature and fixture in my time growing up. And that Bobby on the Beat, is being moved away, taken out of the schools. There's so much, I believe, that we need to see the human side of policing. They need to really step up the rank and bring more police into the communities as well, and build relationships, because it's broken down, but we do need to build relationships.
And here's the thing, you talk about that, and I absolutely agree. I'm a little older than you, but I remember the local Bobby on the Beat, police actually walking around on the streets of your local community. Now everybody's in a car or nowhere to be seen. And I know there's a problem even with the police service now recruiting. They're struggling to recruit people to join. Why? Because of a number of issues, one of which is people not prepared to take the risk for the pay that they get. The backlash a lot of police get when something goes wrong and you're at risk of losing your job and your pension. And so when people see that, who maybe have a desire to join the police, they're put off. And so if we don't have enough people to police our communities, what do we think is going to happen? People are going to feel unsafe. People are going to want to take their own decisions in terms of how they protect themselves, and particularly for the topic we're talking about, young people who are in fear, what will they do? They will arm themselves. So what do we do? What do we do?
You're so right. And what you said there, Stephen. And for me, I've been privileged to work and train new police recruits in Camden and in Islington. And I'm looking at Sir Mark Rowley's plans, and that he's talked about as well, more trust and open or so forth. But I'm not pointing the finger at no one person, but there is a lot of double standards. Now, a lot of people want to join the police force. People want to do good, but they also need to be supported as well. I'll be honest with you. And if they can be supported, then I believe they can do a better job in supporting the community as well. But they need to be supported as well. And if we're honest as well, they need that support, because they're the ones that's putting their lives at risk out there. Say, listen, I want to try and prevent any particular crimes from happening and so forth. And we couldn't do without them. So there does need to be an investment in law enforcement. That's very important, just as much as there needs to be an investment in our youth and our young people and our communities. They work hand in hand.
Yeah. Well, we talked a moment ago about the closure of a lot of youth clubs. Also, with the closure of a lot of youth clubs that people don't always realize, closure of youth clubs means those who worked in those spaces, who are particularly well known to children, had that level of trust, they get fired, they become unemployed. And so the very people who are perhaps best suited to deal with some young people who we all recognize, some have some really challenging backgrounds and difficulties, they're no more. They've disappeared. They've gone. So then what happens?
Right. Now, you see, I love that you mentioned about, not to digress, but you mentioned about a rap academy, and which was a great youth club and still is doing some great work. And I have to mention it. These places nurture young people and we give positive role models and mentors. And there's a young man, as you may well know, he was a 13-year-old boy named Michael, and he would attend the youth club rap academy religiously after school from 13 all the way to probably to 18 years old. That young man today, his name is Stormzy. And it just goes to show the nurturing and the support that these young people can get in these youth centers and these youth clubs with positive role models and influence, And we were running the Rap Academy as a music communication and life skills program, and I was there teaching them and telling them how to write without cursing. And they asked why. I said, you would widen your vocabulary. And, it was wonderful. And you can see what we can produce, if we have if these young people have positive role models, whether they're good children or not so good children, or just finding it hard, or even doing well at school. It's good to have these positive pockets of role models and good influences around you. Absolutely. Very important. You take that away for some, and I've seen it happen, and I've seen them go straight into crime, and are now entered into the prison estate.
And David, look, I mean, you do not shy away from the past that you had, and the experiences you had. And when we talk about the prison estate, I'm always surprised by the number of, I can't remember how many people I've represented over these years, but the number of young people who, on the face of it, it's almost like a badge of honor till you get there. And then many of the young people, they can't wait to leave fast enough. They don't want to be there. They fall into depression. Just tell people, I mean, what it's like, because it's not all about PlayStations and having the run of the prison, is it?
No, it's not. And I can talk about it from two standpoints. Talking about it from my standpoint of being there and going through it myself, but even more so working in the prison estate now. Absolutely. And talking to these young men on the landing day in and day out. And I'm hearing, I want out. I don't want this life. I want to get away. They want to get out, and they, like you said, they couldn't get out quick enough. And then the bad man, is no longer that bad man perception that you thought or you seen with them before. They want to go out, because many of them, whether we see it or not, they're like men locked away in, or boys in men's bodies. These are children, the young men. They don't understand life until they get an opportunity to speak with someone like me. But it's terrible. Yes, they have their TVs and they have their PlayStations. But let me tell you something. I was one of those people who would say, listen, when you're going to prison, you should be sleeping on the floor. You should be on a cardboard. Back in the days, that's how I used to think. But then there was no rehabilitation. And rehabilitation, even now, I don't focus on rehabilitation. I focus on transformation, because I cannot rebuild an advanced childhood experiences. I need to give them something new. It's not a nice place. I won't mention where I currently work at the moment, at this precise time. You're seeing birds flying around in the prison. You're seeing cockroaches. You're seeing rats running around. It's inhumane. I mean, how am I going to rehabilitate you in that environment? Having yourself disconnected from the community alone is bad enough. But to be in conditions like that, where you can come out on the landing, and before you know it, someone's attacked you from behind, and you've been stabbed, or you've been hit over the head. And these are real life things that have happened, that I've seen, and I've been by the work that I'm currently doing. It's not a nice place. I wouldn't encourage and want it. I wouldn't want that for anybody. I'd rather them, turn and change their lives and don't have to go into prison. Because I say, you don't have to go to prison to have a story. You don't have to go into prison to have a story. And that's something we need to realize.
Wow, I like that. You don't have to go to prison for a story. Wow. I mean, we talk about Stormzy and the effect of being in the youth club had on him. I mean, it speaks for itself, the success he's had. The other issue that I keep thinking about is, look, not every child in today's modern society, and things have changed very much from when we were growing up in terms of vocation and what things you want to do. Not every child is going to want to go to university or college, but we seem to be forgetting that there are skills and trades, apprenticeships, the things that we can offer youngsters as a viable alternative, using role models and mentors who are in that space, who are living very productive lives, crime-free lives, very happy lives. If we're not offering these youngsters a viable alternative, of course a young man's going to say, I can make $1,000 a week running in a line from London down to Portsmouth or somewhere. We've got to offer them a viable alternative, don't we?
We do. And I say to the guys every time I speak to you guys, I say, what's the plan? They look at me, what's the plan? So what's the plan? What's the purpose? Where's your life going? What do you want to do? And when I first have the conversation with them, they many times cannot give me an answer. I said, okay, we can come back to that. But if I sit down long enough, they mention, you know what, I actually like cooking, or I'm actually good with figures, you know. And I said, when we talk about it, I said, have you ever considered being an accountant? One said to me, but that's a woman's job. You know, I don't know where you got that perception from. I said, but you're good with money. And I began to talk to him about a young person who's got into accounts and as an accountant. And he thought, wow, I'd like to do that. So many times they don't know the options and what are there for them. You know, some say they want to be in can you get me into this? They don't know that we are there and we can help. Well, a key thing I believe, I mean, like I said, you don't have to go to every story, but those who have lived experience, utilize them. And I'm not talking just lived experience and still living that life.
Yeah.
I'm talking, you know, there's a big difference. I'm talking about they've had that lived experience, and I'd like to know that they've lived longer than they have lived that life before. That would be ideal. Just like myself, you know, that might not be the case. They may be out of prison 3-4 years, but they're now got a good track record. And I think these young men and young women with these lived experiences, or who are no longer living or about that life, are very good influencers for young people. I really do believe that.
Yeah, I mean, I give you an example. I spoke to a man recently who he was doing some work for me, funnily enough. And he was a carpenter, and I got talking to him, and he told me about his life as a 17-year-old and what he was in and what he was involved in. And he said he was desperate to speak to young people to say, look, that life, you know, he was so desperate to get away from it. And then he realized the things that he'd learned at school, i.e., he was good with his hands, he learned he was a very good carpenter, and now that's his trade. And he, you know, he's got a young family. He goes out to work every day. He runs his own business. And I get frustrated that these safe spaces, which could have been utilized for young people who just simply have lost their way or don't see any hope. The number of young people I've met who said, no one cares about me. I can't see a future, so I might as well take this road. If we were able to use those safe spaces and those places and the individuals who connect with them, a place for role models to go to engage with young people. Because I'm always approached by people saying, how can I help? What can I do? Then I think we might be able to start tackling some of these issues.
Totally. I agree with you. And I believe as we begin to nurture this raw talent, you know, in these young people, they begin to nurture other young people as peer mentors. And you'll be surprised, they'll have more influence than you and I could ever have. And this is so important, you know, and if we could just tap into them and allow them, then they will tap into others as well. And I think that's that's key. Just like the gentleman that you talked about just now. And it's like, what do you have in your hands, basically? What do you have? What you know, what's your imagination? What's your dream? Maybe that's your purpose. Maybe that's your calling. Maybe you can do something with that to start. And I think that's important because people don't realize that's a sense of belonging. That's a sense of identity. People want more identity, believe it or not, than they do want money. But the money has become their distorted perception of what it means to be that person. But when you find your talent and the purpose that you've been created for, there's no greater joy. And that's why there's so many people out there, such as myself, the jobs that we do, what we currently do, you couldn't put a price on it. You know, we could do, there's many other jobs and skills and talents that we have, but it's not directly about the finances, but we do need that. You know, by the sweat of your brow, you eat your bread. Nevertheless, you know, we love what we do and we wouldn't give it away and for love or for money, I guess.
Now, let me ask you this, David, though. As an artist, you know, you're a musical artist as well. I often get into big arguments and disputes with people about the role music plays in youth violence. And the number of young men I've represented who have been in a video where someone's been singing about something negative, about wanting to do something to some rival group, the Ops and all of that stuff. And there's a school of thought, well, you know, music should play no part in the courtroom because it's art, it's an art form. And so people shouldn't be tarnished with being part of a gang or a group, or end up being convicted because of songs or lyrics that they've sang. And then they point to other genres of music where people sing about all sorts, and it doesn't mean they end up being incarcerated. But you're a musician. What's your view on the power of lyrics and what people sing about?
I would say it's the intent, the
Right.
purpose behind it. See, two people's work can go through the fire, and one can come out as pure gold, and the other one will be consumed, because it's the intent why that particular perhaps music is getting recognized for inciting violence. And I don't believe there's no place for that. There is no place for that, and a lot of the lyrics at times are rooted, especially with some of the youth culture, in their gang affiliations, and that is going on out there in the post-Cold world and war. So there is a place, and I think, yes, lyrics are very powerful. They can be used for good or for evil. Yeah, it was only about 3 weeks ago, I was walking in the prison and I saw a young man doing press-ups, and I said to him, "Give me 50 more." And he said, "I just did 49. And I walked up to him, and you know what I did? I sang an 8-bar from one of my songs to him. And when I finished singing that song, which was a religious song, he said, "I'd like to know more about that person in that song." And we stood up and we prayed. I check on him every day now. Wow. And he's realized, and we talked about the error of his ways, and it was just a song. It was so powerful. And the song was called Life Giver, the grave digger, life giver. And I sang that song, just a few bars to him, and he was enchanted. And it was just that music changed his perception. He said he had no belief in no religion. I said, neither do I. But he wanted to know more about that passion, that person that I was singing about, and it was beautiful. So music does play a part. We do have to take in consideration. It's just like terrorism. If you're inciting violence, you're inciting violence. You can use it for good or for evil. And I think the point is, like I said again, it's the intent. Why are you doing it to encourage a group or gang or to attack someone else? That's like that's not right, Or is it lyrics talking about real life situations? Like I've done it. I've written songs and talking about my life. If somebody did this to me, what I would do. But it wasn't to incite anything in anyone. It was about me, and it was a real life situation. So yes, it goes back to that intent.
Wow. One of our viewers says, "True, many young people are not aware of the opportunities around them or the options they have." I mean, this is, I'm assuming, coming from a young person, and they're saying it.
Yes.
They're aware of the opportunities around them or the options they have. And I say it's really important because, I think young people have got a really tough gig growing up today. I remember as a youngster, even in the summer, summer holidays coming up, I remember I could walk the length of George Street into various shops and I could be offered a number of summer jobs, 10 or so. Those opportunities are not there. I mean, I grew up in Croydon. If you walk through Croydon, it's not the Croydon I grew up in. Shops closed, place looks very different. And so a lot of young people, they're struggling to see an opportunity to make money, to sustain themselves, particularly even in London, in the capital, where it's so expensive to live.
That's right.
People struggling to put food on the table for their families. And I've heard of stories of young people getting involved in, the drug business, not because they want to, but it's a source of income to provide electric for the meter or to put food on the table so the younger siblings can eat. I mean, that's UK today.
Oh, yes.
And I'm not glamorizing or overemphasizing the reality of the situation for many people in the UK today. And this is why I've said, on this season of Life in Focus, I really want to have some hard conversations about what it means when you don't invest in people. Because you said it at the top there, David, you get frustrated. On one view, there's a call, we want to end knife crime, but then nothing seems to be done. Let me ask you this, David. What do you think, if anything, the role of government, local government, or even national government, what role do they have to play?
The first thing is to listen to the community. Go into the communities. Like you say, it's important to build those relationships. It's important to not just have these meetings, but to listen. And what we place down on paper, we need to see it in practice. We need to support these grassroots organizations. They may not have a good bank account, but we're going to have to learn to build trust, to work with them and allow them to begin to establish themselves in order for them to build their organization so that there is sustainability. And I think the key thing, you have to listen to those on the ground. You're not going to be able to make those decisions from the high places. You need to come down where the people are. It's about becoming all things to all men. You know, it's not becoming like them, but it's meeting them where they are at. And that's key. And I believe if we can do that, you know, we can begin to see something roll out and that can help to stop what we're currently seeing, you know, from the work with the community to the young people. The young person that I spoke to this week said to me, it started for me at the age of 13 when I was told to leave school because I had an argument with a teacher. And he said, when I came out of school, up till then, I was so in love with history. And it led this young person down the path of being charged with attempted murder cases and walking with a pistol. And he knew everything about history. I just listened to him and marveled about history. And then I began to say, tapping, and it's funny enough, he was a local person. And I began to tell him about the history of where he lived and where he grew up. And I began to tell him, did you know that estate was called this? It was made by John Angel, who lived in Stockwell. It was a wonderful conversation. It triggered him. And every day he says, I want to get involved in history. I want to do something around history. But it's amazing. But through the conversations, he realized this is where it went wrong for me. So we found out that why. And I think these are the conversations that need to be had and help and support from the top right to the bottom, and from the bottom bring it back up to the top.
Absolutely. Because, you know, we've had new legislation to deal with certain types of weapons. How effective that will be, I don't know. Because, you know, human beings being what we are, people always find a way to circumvent legislation in terms of getting hold of weapons. I recently read of 2 14-year-olds who were arrested for selling zombie knives. They were literally ordering them and then selling them on.
Yes, I heard about that.
I mean, you know, when we talk about breaking the cycle, you know, I was quite down when someone who I always see as being positive, and you said, you don't think, are you saying that you don't think the cycle can be broken?
I think that the question should be, are we willing to put in the hard grafting to break the cycle?
That's the question.
Are we willing to put in that level? And there's no other way. There is no other way. And from the lens of government, community, I don't see it. Looking at the community, I don't see it. I think the grassroots people are ready. I don't think government's ready. I don't think.
Sorry, David, you touched on, you said this a number of times, grassroots level people. You and I both know that across this country, there are some amazing organizations doing some amazing work on very limited budgets. And I know there's competition for funding, but in order to get the work done. What's your view on, I think I know what you're going to say, but what's your view on the support, the level of support that those who are what I call at the coalface, who understand their local area, they understand the challenges, what level of support are they getting? And if you're not able to say or answer that, what level of support do you think they should be getting?
Right. What I will say is this: you do have to get to know your counselors. You do need to get involved with your community. You do need to approach them with your ideas. And I do believe good government, good infrastructure will support you. I have just recently received funding to tackle knife crime in Brixton.
Right.
And that's from my local council and government. They love the plans, they love the ideas, and they said, listen, we're going to plug into this to tackle this issue. And that was wonderful. But that was on a smaller level. Trying to get that money from the very top is very difficult. Why? Yes, there are major organizations that I say are monopolizing, and they are the ones that will get the finances because their bank account looks good. They will then work with those in the local people and say, come along and help, basically do your own work. But they're breaking down their infrastructure, so they're not being able to continue the great work that they're doing the way they'd like to do it, because it's got all these KPIs on it. We want this, we want that, and it's this tick box and number crunch, and we're missing the purpose. I've heard it said, we're hitting the target, but we're missing the mark, and that's where we are, unfortunately.
What do we do to change the mindset of those at the very top? Because they talk the good game, and when they're confronted in public spaces or on television debate shows, we're really keen to tackle this problem. But how much of that is empty promises, empty words? How do we engage them to really see the full impact of the work being done and the work ahead? You said it a moment ago. The question is, are you willing to do the hard work?
I grew up with this saying that I heard my parents say: a promise is a comfort to a fool. And unfortunately, that might be the reason why we get so many empty promises, is because how we are perceived. Perhaps that's the reason why, is how we are perceived. Because, as you rightly said, they give a good talk, but we need to see it in action. I think it can be difficult. Grassroots organizations, it's difficult. Somehow, if we can come together and do a great work, and it can be presented, and they will be willing to give the funding to support the work, that would be beautiful. Because then that would allow them to put the money where their mouth is, to say, listen, you guys did a great work. And yes, it's difficult to do it because you do need the finance, you need the infrastructure. There are some good organizations that are now beginning to set up lovely infrastructures for grassroots organizations to get involved and work alongside them. I'm yet to see how it's going to pan out, but it's a great idea. And hopefully I'll be able to fill you in more on that as it progresses. And these are, multi-million-pound organizations that are opening up some great networks at the moment, which I'm privileged to be a part of at this present time. And I'm willing to give as much support as what I can. I'm willing to help out with setting up companies for, that's having people to look at my infrastructure and what I put in place and how I've got funding. These are things I'm open and willing to share, and if it means it's going to help, because it's one body, many parts, we need each other. And that's the only way we're going to get this done. It's got to be a unified approach.
Do you think there's an element of protectionist behavior by some organizations not wanting to share and wanting to exclude others?
That happens when you don't know who you are. I never forget my brother saying to me, I used to write so many programs in so many different local governments, and big governments will take my ideas and run with it and so forth. And he said this word to me. He said, David, they can take your ideas, but not your creativity. And so, when you know that these things are birthed out of you, you don't need to worry. You will come with something new. As they start with something, you got a new idea. But unfortunately, it can be quite incestuous. People hold on to what they got. Why? I don't know. I'll never understand it, because we can only do this as a collective. We do need to come together. But yes, unfortunately, there are organizations with ulterior motives. We've seen it in the past. No doubt it will still be going on today. However, we have to begin to build good, meaningful relationships with those who are integral as well, by their, not only by their accounts, but by their engagement within the community.
Well, I'm tempted to ask, as we start to wind it down, let me ask you this, David. I mean, it sounds like a really stupid question, but it feeds into the views taken from those at the top. Why is it so important that we deal with this problem and get it right?
The knife crime problem, the knife crime issue, well, we're losing our young people. Mothers, fathers burying their sons. The economy, it's breaking down. We need these young people. Some people may argue and say, and I can't comment too much on it, but there's a lot of theories. People looking at the COVID situation, so many people unfortunately lost their lives, and condolences to people who did, even to this from this point. However, you look at it, and if you're honest, sometimes I get those thoughts. I talk for myself. You think, do the government really want it to stop? And that's the truth. I have those thoughts. Those intrusive thoughts will come. Do they really want it to stop? Because so many great organizations are talking about what they can do to help to reduce or to stop this knife crime epidemic, but nothing's being done. And so that intrusive thought captures me and say, do they really want it to stop?
But it's almost like shooting yourself in the foot if you had that mentality that you don't really want it to stop, because it's the next generation of young people who are being affected by this. And I don't think we yet live in a society where people see human beings as collateral damage to some bigger agenda. But we pride ourselves in a nation of being a modern democracy. This is what I can't get my head around.
Totally. But we don't want to say it, and you've made a good point. Does it happen elsewhere around the world? Probably not so much. But it's the type of people that seems to be involved with knife crime. Are they valued? Are they seen as people? Or is it easier to allow them to have these knives to kill themselves and wipe themselves out? I don't know. Is it easier? Is it easier to just see these young people, those who may be involved in exploitation and gangs and county lines? Is it easier to see them just killing themselves? Are their lives valued as much as someone else who may not be known to the criminal justice system? Are their lives valued as much? And that's why I have to question it, because a lot more at this stage should have been done. A lot more. And it's just like you said, shooting yourself in the foot, and that's how I feel at present, unfortunately.
Well, as ever, an enlightening conversation with you, David. I'd like to think that there is hope for the future, and that we will eventually break the cycle of youth offending and youth violence. Certainly, I'm not naive enough to think that we will completely eradicate young people taking each other's lives. It happened. It's happened in the 60s. It happened in the 70s, but certainly not on the level that we've seen across this nation today. But I'm hopeful that there is, as the young person says, there is hope. I'm looking at the screen here. There is hope, and we have to have that hope for our next generation. Otherwise, we're all in trouble.
We do.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, David?
Hope is an expectation of something good to come. So let's have an expectation of something good to come. I'll encourage all young people to stop and think before you become extinct. Have hope and expectation of something good to come.
Wow. Dr. David Williams, David, I want to thank you for coming on the platform again. Thank you for all the work that you do, both in the community and on the prison estate. Please keep doing it. Please keep using the gift that God has given you. I know that that's a very passionate thing of yours, very important to you. Keep up the good work. And you still look as fit as ever after all these years. Great to see you, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
God bless. Take care.
God bless you.
Well, I did say on this this series that we'd be speaking to various guests, having some really tough conversations. I think the time has come where people have simply had enough about knife crime and the conversations, young people losing their lives. People are tired. I'm tired, to be honest. But we need to keep having the conversations, garnering the support of those who are in a position to change the trajectory that we're currently on. The great work that's been done by grassroots organizations, collaboration, forward thinking, for a world which is very different from the ones that we adults grew up in. And we have to think about the future for our young people and what we are offering them as a viable alternative to what is currently available to them. As I say, not everybody is going to go to university or be a doctor or a lawyer, but we have to be able to offer young people a future and a hope and an expectation. So I'll explore this again on the next show with a new guest. Let's keep believing, let's keep hoping, let's keep praying for our children, let's keep them safe, and hopefully we will be able to break this cycle of UK knife crime, not London knife crime, UK knife crime. So until next time, I want to thank you for watching and your support. My name is Stephen Akinsanya. I'm a barrister at law at 15 New Bridge Street Chambers, practicing in criminal law. But I'm more interested now in trying to get young people to be educated, their families to be educated on real issues that are affecting them and how we can tackle them together. I'll see you next time. God bless. Take care.